At the opulent birthday celebration for the disabled son of a major mafia boss, every powerful guest, every supposed ally, shamefully averted their gaze, except for one person, the waitress. Today, I am recounting the astonishing, life-altering journey of Sophia, a humble waitress who displayed profound human kindness by shielding Don Giancarlo Duca's son when a room full of elite society chose cold-hearted indifference. What unfolded in the aftermath of her courageous act was a radical transformation that changed her destiny forever. Remain until the conclusion to understand the magnitude of this story. Please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The subterranean banquet hall of the ancient palazzo shimmered with reflected light from crystal chandeliers and elaborate gilded decorations. The air was thick with the low, continuous murmur of the assembled mafia elite. At the immense head table, Don Giancarlo Duca, a man of imposing presence and tailored Italian silk, stood with a protective heavy hand resting on the shoulder of his only son, Nico. This gathering was intended as a festive milestone, yet Giancarlo's usually dark, composed eyes were constantly watchful, scanning the room for threats invisible to the untrained eye. Nico, overwhelmed by the oppressive clamor of booming conversations and the incessant clinking of glasses, instinctively pressed himself closer into the fortress of his father's side. Moving through the throng, delicately balancing a silver tray laden with fragile champagne flutes, was Sophia Romano. She was merely hired help for the evening, but her focus kept straying back to Nico. She instantly recognized the repetitive hand flapping and the sharp, involuntary cringe whenever a burst of laughter erupted nearby. These were unmistakable signals of severe sensory overload, echoes of her own younger brother, Matteo. Watching Nico visibly struggle brought a painful, familiar ache to her chest. Giancarlo leaned down, whispering urgent, low reassurances to his son just as a sudden, sharp cackle from a nearby table made Nico recoil entirely. The Don immediately produced a pair of professional earplugs from his pocket, a measure of control, but Nico shook his head rapidly, his dark curls flying. Even the minimal pressure of the plugs seemed like an insurmountable barrier in his current state. Sophia frowned, concerned. Surely, she thought, Nico, the son of the powerful Don, would have access to a complete calming kit, noise-canceling headphones, maybe a weighted lap pad, or at least a trusty fidget toy. She saw the Don exchange a rapid, tense whisper with his chief bodyguard, Roberto. Roberto patted his pockets, his posture stiffening, and shook his head, confirming the worst. A flash of raw, exposed alarm crossed the Don's formidable face. Nico's small, critical backpack of comfort items was missing. Sophia's stomach knotted with a wave of cold fury directed at whoever had been negligent enough to let that essential bag vanish. A cheerful, heraldic call announcing the time for cake suddenly boomed out over a microphone, and the ambient light in the hall dramatically dimmed. A towering cake, perched on a magnificent gilded cart, was slowly wheeled into the center of the hall, candles and sparklers blazing like small pyrotechnic fountains. Nico's already rapid breathing accelerated even further at the jarring shift in light and sound. The event coordinator, oblivious, started the birthday song with excessive cheer, and the gathered crowd reluctantly joined in. They had barely sung the first line when a catastrophic, shrill feedback squeal, a piercing metallic whine, blasted from the speaker system. The sound was so intense it felt like a sharp blade tearing through the entire hall. Nico screamed, a sound of pure terror, clapping his hands desperately over his ears and stumbling backward violently against his father. His beloved comfort tablet slipped from his grasp, shattering against the marble floor. Giancarlo instinctively gripped the boy, his own heart hammering against his ribs, but Nico was already spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. The entire hall fell into a shocking, sudden silence. Dozens of eyes fixed upon the Don's son, their expressions a mixture of shock, profound discomfort, and thinly veiled judgment. Whispers began to ripple through the tables, growing louder. "Is he all right?" Some murmured with a detached pity, but far more spoke with palpable irritation. Sophia caught fragments of truly cruel, cutting comments. "He's not normal. Unfit to lead anything, an older man muttered dismissively. Parents quickly hushed their children, pulling them away as if Nico were a contagious spectacle. One by one, the guests subtly edged away, retreating into the deeper shadows of the hall. Within moments, a visible, conspicuous vacuum opened up around Nico and Don Giancarlo. The crowd had physically and metaphorically turned its back on the distressed child, leaving the powerful father and his panicked son isolated in a ring of cold, empty space. Everyone had stepped away, abandoning the terrified boy in his moment of greatest vulnerability. Everyone, that is, except Sophia. Sophia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She placed her tray carefully onto a service stand, unable to bear witnessing this systemic cruelty for another second. These may have been VIPs, the pillars of the criminal underworld, but this was simply a terrified child, and he desperately needed intervention. A memory flashed, sharp and painful. Little Matteo cornered by older bullies, while oblivious or uncaring adults simply looked on, and how she herself had been too young, too scared, and had utterly frozen back then. Never again. Marshalling every scrap of her courage, Sophia approached Nico slowly, deliberately, and knelt down a few feet in front of him. She maintained open palms, a non-threatening gesture, and kept her voice soft and even. "Hey!" she asked gently, her tone steady and warm, a beacon of normalcy amidst the hostile silence. "That was a truly scary noise, wasn't it? It's completely okay to be scared right now." Nico rocked violently on his heels, a thin whimper caught in his throat, barely registering her presence at first. Giancarlo's fierce gaze snapped to Sophia, uncertain but displaying a flicker of raw hope. He made no move to stop her. For Nico's sake, the powerful Don was willing to grab any offered lifeline. From the pocket of her pristine black uniform, Sophia carefully produced a small, shiny foil-wrapped chocolate coin, a relic she had snatched from a discarded dessert tray. Holding it out on her open palm, she spoke softly into the quiet space. "How about we just take a little break somewhere much quieter? You can hold this if you want something to focus on." The coin glinted under the chandeliers, catching Nico's attention for a critical second. His eyes, swimming with unshed tears, latched onto the small, harmless object. "We can go entirely at your pace," Sophia added, ensuring he felt control. "You lead the way. I absolutely promise I won't touch you unless you specifically say it's okay. You are completely in charge." Nico's ragged breathing hitched. He darted a fearful look around the room at the judgmental adults, who pointedly averted their gazes, then focused back on Sophia, the only person kneeling with him in his suffocating world of fright. Finally, he offered a tiny, desperate nod and reached out for the chocolate coin. His fingers briefly brushed Sophia's trembling hand as he took the object. Sophia smiled encouragingly, a genuine, soft smile. She rose slowly, meticulous not to make any sudden movements that might startle him. "This way," she whispered, gesturing toward a discreet side door that led to a quiet service corridor. Nico clutched the foil coin tightly, shuffling forward, drawn by the desperate promise of immediate escape. Giancarlo silently stepped aside to let them pass, his intense eyes never leaving his son. Sophia caught the Don's gaze for a fleeting instant. He dipped his head in a gesture of profound permission, a sheen of unspoken gratitude visible in his expression. They had barely taken a few steps when chaos erupted again, a seemingly coordinated strike. A door on the opposite side of the hall banged open as servers arrived with yet more sparklers on trays, and simultaneously, a burst of drunken laughter erupted somewhere among the guests. A jarring spike of noise. In that same instant, Sophia heard a different sound rising above the din. A faint, deeply insidious hum, high-pitched, whining, and growing louder with alarming speed. Nico cried out at the newest assault on his senses, dropping the chocolate coin, which rolled silently across the marble. This was no random feedback or ringing ears. Sophia's eyes darted frantically to the towering pile of wrapped gifts near the cake. One silver-wrapped box with an oversized red velvet bow was vibrating subtly, its lid minutely ajar. A cold, Terrifying shock ran through her veins. There was some kind of powerful electronic device hidden inside that box, actively emitting the sound. Her gaze then snagged on a man in a pale gray suit lurking near the back, partially concealed behind a massive marble column. He wasn't reacting with the confused discomfort of the other guests. Instead, he was watching Nico with a predator's chilling focus. Sophia saw him raise a sleek phone, his thumb rapidly tapping a message. His lip curled into a cruel, minimal smile as he silently mouthed the single, devastating word. Now! Her stomach turned violently. This was absolutely deliberate. This was an attack. Sophia lunged toward the screaming gift box. She ripped the lid open a few inches, desperate to shut off whatever mechanism was inside. The hum instantly spiked into a piercing, agonizing shriek, as if sensing its imminent moment of triumph. Nico's hands flew back to his ears. He let out a deep, agonizing wail of pain that sliced through the silent hall. John Carlo's face contorted with pure, killing rage. He started forward, his hand twitching toward his jacket. Toward a gun, Sophia knew. But he stopped himself abruptly as he saw the waitress scooping up the box, clutching the vibrating, malevolent package to her chest. Sophia yelled to Nico over the deafening noise. "Come on!" Almost there. With her free arm, she reached out for him. The boy, eyes squeezed tight shut, felt her gentle, guiding tug on his sleeve and instinctively followed, stumbling the last few steps away from the elevated platform. Sophia kicked the side door open and dragged Nico into the corridor. Cool, profound darkness instantly enveloped them as the heavy oak door thudded closed, successfully muffling the chaotic banquet hall behind them. In the dim quiet, the device's faint whine was still audible, though significantly fainter. Nico sank completely to the floor against the wall, shaking uncontrollably and sobbing. Sophia's hands trembled violently as she set the silver box down with care. An ominous LCD display on the humming gadget blinked a countdown of seconds, timed perfectly to cause maximum mayhem at the height of the party. White-hot anger flared through her. She located the power switch and flipped it. The device went instantly and mercifully silent, leaving only the sound of Nico's muffled sobs echoing in the narrow space. She knelt near Nico, ensuring space, but close enough to be a tangible, reassuring presence. "It's off now," she soothed, her voice low and steady. "The bad noise is completely gone, Nico. You are safe." Nico's face was buried tightly in his knees. Slowly, painstakingly, he lifted his head, tears carving tracks through the dust on his cheeks. He gasped raggedly for air, panic still etched into every tense line of his small body. Sophia knew she needed to help him reestablish a steady breathing pattern. Softly, she murmured, "Smell the flower." As she spoke, she pantomimed the action, holding an imaginary flower to her nose and inhaling deeply. Then she gently exhaled and performed the action of blowing out a candle. The child watched her, his mind slowly recognizing the familiar coping exercise. Nico tried his best to follow along. Inhale, exhale. With each shaky breath out, he released a tiny portion of the consuming panic. Sophia repeated the mantra, breathing visibly with him, encouraging him with quiet, small smiles. Gradually, Nico's desperate gulps of air transformed into more even, controlled breaths. His rocking slowed, gradually ceasing. After a minute that felt like an hour, he scrubbed at his wet cheeks with his sleeve. Sophia offered him another soft smile. "Better?" she asked. Nico managed a tiny, exhausted nod. He was physically depleted and still frightened, but he was regaining critical control. Relief washed through Sophia, thick and immediate. The worst of the meltdown had finally passed. Then, the crushing reality of what had just occurred crashed over her. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged Nico's birthday. Sophia's eyes drifted to the silent, gaudily wrapped device. The missing comfort kit, the perfectly timed microphone squeal, this humming box. It was all a coordinated vicious attack on a child, intended to strike brutally at Don Giancarlo's heart and pride. They had intended to publicly embarrass the Don, to viciously paint Nico as a functional failure in front of the entire clan. And they had succeeded in making everyone turn their backs on the boy in his deepest moment of crisis. Everyone, that is, except Sophia. She felt a fresh tremor of ice-cold anger. Who possessed such cruelty? And what would their reprisal be now that she had completely interfered? Sophia realized with a jolt that she had just stepped squarely, violently, into high-stakes mafia business. She was a civilian, a simple waitress who had openly defied the powerful by protecting the Don's son when everyone else remained passive. It was an extraordinarily brave or spectacularly foolish thing to have done. But looking at Nico now, seeing the nascent trust in his wide eyes as he clutched the foil coin she had retrieved for him, Sophia knew instantly she would not have acted differently. If upholding her vow to stand up for the vulnerable meant courting immediate danger, then so be it. From inside the chaotic hall, muffled shouts and a continuation of disorder carried through the heavy door. Sophia could faintly make out Giancarlo's voice, taut with barely restrained, thunderous fury, demanding immediate answers. He would hunt down whoever did this. Of that she had absolutely no doubt. Her only worry was what that vengeance might entail. A small, hesitant hand reached out and tugged lightly at her sleeve. Nico. He looked up at Sophia, his eyes still glassy with shock but deeply earnest. With a shuddering final breath, he managed a weak, fragile smile of gratitude. Sophia's chest tightened painfully. This boy's simple, genuine thank you was infinitely more meaningful than any word the powerful Don could ever utter. Gently, Sophia placed her hand over Nico's, squeezing lightly in reassurance. It's going to be all right, she promised him softly. In that dim, quiet corridor, she was no longer just a waitress or a stranger. She had become his instant, fierce protector. Heavy footsteps pounded in the hall beyond the door, and voices rapidly drew near the closed barrier. Roberto and other bodyguards, alerted by the continuous chaos, were coming to secure Nico. Sophia knew the fragile, peaceful bubble they had found here was about to shatter. She took a final, deep calming breath and stood, instinctively positioning herself slightly in front of Nico. The door flew open violently, light spilling into the corridor as Roberto and two heavily armed men rushed through. They froze instantly at the sight of Nico on the floor and Sophia kneeling calmly at his side. Giancarlo pushed past them a mere heartbeat later, raw, wild concern etched into every line of his face. Sophia met the Don's gaze, her chin lifted defiantly despite the frantic adrenaline coursing through her veins. Nothing would ever be the same after this night. That much she already knew. But whatever storm was coming, she would face it with the same unwavering resolve that had carried her this far. She had stood by Nico when no one else would, and she certainly wasn't about to back down now. Giancarlo barreled into the corridor and immediately knelt, enveloping Nico in his arms. The formidable Don visibly trembled with immense relief as his son clung desperately to him. Sophia stepped back, her heart still hammering, as Roberto and the other guards secured the immediate area, checking corners and assessing the quiet box. Nico buried his face deep into Giancarlo's shoulder. The Don stroked his hair, whispering, "Sonoka, I'm here." When Nico's sobs finally quieted into ragged sighs, Giancarlo looked up at Sophia. Raw, unadulterated gratitude shone in his dark, intense eyes. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, the weight and magnitude of those two simple words evident in his tone. Sophia nodded, still catching her breath. Giancarlo stood, lifting Nico effortlessly into his arms. "I have things that must be said to our guests," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the corridor. He noticed Nico's small hand gripping Sophia's sleeve, the boy utterly unwilling to let her go. "Stay with us," Giancarlo commanded/requested. It was both a request and an unquestionable command. Sophia fell into step instantly beside the Don as they re-entered the tumultuous banquet hall. The low chatter instantly died. All eyes locked onto the unusual trio. The stone-faced mafia boss, his shaken son cradled in his arms, and the simple waitress who had unexpectedly saved the day. Giancarlo's voice, low and deadly, sliced through the tense silence. No one leaves. A few guests who had been subtly inching toward the exits froze instantly. The dawn's glacial glare promised immediate, painful consequences for disobedience. What transpired tonight was an absolute disgrace, he stated, each syllable deliberate and heavy with condemnation. My son was hurt and frightened, suffering an intentional attack, and nearly every single one of you stood by, passively watching. People shifted uncomfortably in their expensive seats. Some opened their mouths to offer feeble, prepared excuses, but Giancarlo raised a hand, a gesture that commanded absolute silence. He continued, his voice ringing with authority. Only one person here displayed true loyalty and genuine courage. He placed a gentle, steady hand on Sophia's back, guiding her forward into the spotlight. A ripple of profound surprise passed violently through the assembled crowd. Sophia felt her cheeks instantly warm as dozens of powerful, scrutinizing eyes turned to her. She had certainly not expected to be thrust into this public arena. But the fierce injustice of what had happened minutes before pushed her personal fear aside. Nico wasn't being rude or difficult, Sophia said, her voice clear, steady, and utterly unwavering. He was deeply overwhelmed, and he needed immediate help. She swept a hard, challenging look around the room, meeting the faces of those who had been sneering and whispering. Don't mistake me. If your respect and your kindness vanish the very moment a situation becomes uncomfortable, then it is not kindness at all. If your loyalty to the Don's son is only good during easy moments, then your loyalty is nothing more than a performance. A few older guests winced noticeably. One bristling man in an immaculate white suit snapped furiously. We did not come here tonight to be lectured by the help. Then perhaps you should have behaved better. Sophia shot back instantly, unflinching and direct. This room was full of supposedly loyal friends. Yet a child suffered entirely alone until a complete stranger stepped in. Shame on every single person who turned away. Gasps and shocked murmurs rose across the hall. A flush of deep indignation crept up the white-suited man's neck. Don Giancarlo? He sputtered, appealing to the Don. Will you truly allow this girl to insult us? Giancarlo's eyes flashed like dark diamonds. You insult yourselves. His low voice cut through the air, final and lethal. Everything she has said is the absolute truth, and unless any of you wish to prove otherwise right now, I strongly suggest you hold your tongues. The room fell into a heavy, chastened silence. Giancarlo subtly shifted Nico in his arms. The boy was now calmer, watching wide-eyed. The Don's gaze softened then, settling solely on Sophia. Miss Sophia has demonstrated more honor tonight than many who loudly claim to be my dedicated allies. He stepped closer to her, still in full, dramatic view of the entire gathered audience. My debt to her, and my son's debt, is truly immeasurable. Giancarlo took a deliberate, deep breath and spoke loudly, ensuring every person in the hall heard him. Sophia saved my child. She protected my family. I intend to ensure she is unequivocally part of my family from this night forward. Sophia's heart momentarily skipped a beat, then began to race wildly. Giancarlo turned toward her and lowered Nico gently to the floor. The boy stood instantly by his father's side, one hand gripping Giancarlo's pant leg, the other reaching out instinctively for Sophia's hand. She grasped Nico's little hand automatically, her pulse pounding with intuition of what was suddenly coming. Sophia, Giancarlo said, his voice strong, deep, and filled with unexpected emotion. Will you do me the ultimate honor of joining my family? Will you marry me and help me care for Nico as his mother? A collective, massive inhale swept audibly through the hall. Sophia's eyes widened to saucers. For a moment, the entire world tilted dramatically on its axis. She glanced down at Nico, his face bright with hopeful expectation, and then up at Giancarlo's steady, intensely earnest expression. This was definitely not how fairy tales typically unfolded, but it felt profoundly, wildly right in its own way. Sophia found herself smiling through tears she hadn't even realized were forming. Yes, she answered, her voice clear and strong in the pervasive silence. Yes, I will. Relief, powerful and immediate, broke across Giancarlo's rugged face. A collective cheer, half genuinely relieved, half obligatorily obedient, went up from the guests. Giancarlo inclined his head respectfully, and in a remarkably tender gesture that surprised everyone present, he lifted Sophia's hand and kissed the back of it. Nico let out a small, happy noise and wrapped his arms tightly around Sophia's waist. Sophia hugged him back, her own laughter mingling with a sob of pure joy and disbelief. Giancarlo turned back to the crowd, wrapping one strong arm protectively around Sophia and resting his other hand securely on Nico's shoulder. From this moment forward, Sophia Romano is under my absolute protection, he declared. She is one of us. Any person who dares disrespect her or my son will answer directly to me. The warning hung palpable, dense, and terrifying in the air. The reality of the Don's proclamation sank in. Heads nodded quickly, and toasts were murmured low. Though profound shock lingered on many faces, absolutely none dared to object. The entire social order of the Duca family had just been decisively upended by Giancarlo's swift, irrevocable action. Within minutes, Giancarlo dismissively addressed the remaining guests. What was left of the birthday celebration dispersed in a muddle of hushed gossip and fearful looks. Staff hurried to begin cleaning while bodyguards efficiently ushered out the last lingering onlookers. Roberto, the security chief, approached quietly as Sophia was helping a drowsy Nico sip some water she had fetched. The chief's expression was grim and set. He spoke softly only to Giancarlo, but Sophia's hearing was sharp. Don, we caught an intruder among the staff, one of Caruso's men. The device and the attempted filming. It's Caruso's doing. Giancarlo's eyes flashed dangerously at the rival's name. Caruso, a competing Mafia family head, had long been a painful thorn in his side, but to specifically target his child? That was an unprecedented low. There was also an attempt to film the incident, Roberto added with a visible scowl. We confiscated a camera and a phone. They were trying to capture Nico's episode on video, most likely to blackmail you or shame the family later. Giancarlo's powerful fist clenched tightly. Caruso, he spat under his breath, the name venomous. It mattered little if the man himself orchestrated it or if it was merely one of his lackeys. Giancarlo would hold him entirely responsible. He will pay for this. Roberto gave a curt nod of agreement. We'll gather all the evidence, Don. For now, I've significantly increased security around the entire premises. And congratulations, he added, a brief, surprising flicker of a smile crossing his tough features as he glanced toward Sophia and Nico. Giancarlo allowed himself a faint, deep smirk of paternal pride. His hand moved almost reflexively to straighten his expensive suit jacket and adjust his cuff links, a small, ingrained gesture to reassert calm. Thank you, old friend. Meanwhile, Sophia was kneeling with Nico slightly off to the side, gently brushing a lock of dark hair from the boy's forehead. All the other children and their mothers had long gone. It was just them and a handful of Giancarlo's most trusted men remaining. How are you feeling, birthday boy? She asked softly, her voice exhausted but warm. Nico tapped a finger on the screen of his tablet, which Roberto had retrieved and returned for him. A synthesized voice, slightly robotic but endearing, softly spoke from the device. Better. Thank you. It was the first time Sophia had heard his AAC device voice that night. She beamed at him. You're very welcome. Nico's small fingers danced on the screen again. Stay with me. Sophia's eyes instantly misted. She nodded firmly. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. Giancarlo came up quietly beside them, having overheard that last part. We should get Nico to bed, he said gently. It's been a very long night. He exchanged a long, meaningful look with Sophia. There was a world of new, powerful understanding in that look, a profound acknowledgement of the strange, dangerous path they were now inextricably on together. Yes, of course, Sophia agreed instantly. She moved to stand, but Nico's hand grasped her own once more, his grip small but firm, as if he feared she might suddenly vanish into the air. Giancarlo noticed the gesture. Would you consider coming back with us to the estate? He asked Sophia quietly, intensely. Tonight, at least. I truly think it would help him sleep. The Don was asking now, not commanding. It was a weary father's request, not a mob boss's order. Sophia didn't even need to contemplate the request. If that's what Nico needs, then yes. She gave the boy's hand a comforting squeeze. Giancarlo nodded, a profound tension easing from his shoulders. A fragile layer of tension seemed to peel away from Giancarlo's shoulders, visible in the long, measured breath he finally allowed himself to take. Our car is waiting. As the last of the Iletti's guests trickled out of the ballroom, quickly escorted by silent, efficient guards, Giancarlo, Sophia, and Nico made their way toward the side exit. The opulent grand hall now seemed desolate, a tableau of abrupt abandonment. Half-eaten plates, upturned glasses of champagne staining the Persian rugs, and that enormous centerpiece cake. Its sculpted tiers still eerily flickering with a few dying birthday candles. It was not the birthday celebration any of them had envisioned, but they had survived the night. Sophia excused herself, needing a moment to retrieve her things from the designated staff room. She carefully left Nico secured in Giancarlo's strong embrace. The boy was now deeply weary, already sleepy and nodding off against his father's shoulder. The catering area was deserted, save for a few chefs silently and wearily cleaning stainless steel surfaces. Sophia found her coat and purse hanging on a hook near the service entrance. As she slung the coat over her shoulders, something small and foreign fluttered down to the ground. The object was a stark, aggressive intrusion, a black linen finish envelope, almost unnaturally sleek against the utilitarian white tiles of the kitchen floor. Frowning deeply, Sophia bent down and picked it up. Her name was written on the front in vibrant, viscous red ink. Sophia. The script was elaborate, almost an attempt at sinister artistry. A deep, visceral chill slithered down her spine, freezing her in place. She found the unsealed flap and slid out the contents. A heavy, ivory-colored card. It was a mass card, the kind handed out at Catholic funerals. The front bore a familiar picture of a grieving angel and a solemn prayer. Sophia's throat tightened painfully. Slowly, fighting a sudden wave of nausea, she unfolded it. Inside, where the words in loving memory of usually preceded the deceased's name, her own name was printed in severe, neat calligraphy. Sophia Romano. Today's date, the day of the attack, was chillingly listed as the date of her death. Her heart hammered wildly, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. At the bottom of the card, scrolled in the very same unsettling red ink, was a message, short and razor-sharp. Asterisk congratulations, Madre. Now you're a target, too. Asterisk Madre. Mother. The card slipped from her fingers, falling back onto the cold tile. Sophia's breaths came shallow and fast as the deadly implication fully sank in. Whoever had plotted tonight's attack was now explicitly acknowledging her new role, her connection to Giancarlo and Nico, and marking her for death because of it. Hands shaking violently, Sophia crouched instantly to snatch up the damning card and the black envelope. She scanned the dim, echoing corners of the empty kitchen, half expecting to see a lurking figure, but saw no one. The few remaining kitchen staff were busy scrubbing dishes, completely oblivious to the terror unfolding just feet away. Sophia swallowed hard, forcing herself to harness a brittle composure. She slipped the card back into the envelope and tucked it deep into an inner pocket of her purse. She would show Giancarlo, but not until Nico was safe and far out of sight. There was no point in alarming the already traumatized child further. But as she rejoined the Don and his son at the side entrance, outwardly composed, Sophia could not shake the cold, creeping dread coiling deep in her stomach. She had stood up to a room full of dangerous mobsters without flinching hours ago. But this personal threat, this intimate promise of violence, felt infinitely more terrifying. It was a pledge delivered from the deepest shadows. Asterisk, we will come for you. She looked at Nico, now sound asleep in Giancarlo's powerful arms, innocent despite the chaos he had just endured. And she looked at Giancarlo, who met her gaze, his concern immediately evident at the sudden pallor of her skin. Sophia squared her shoulders, a rigid line of resolve. If being by their side made her a target, so be it. She would face whatever came. Is everything all right? Giancarlo asked, his voice barely a breath. As Roberto opened the car door for them, Sophia managed a tight, mechanical smile and nodded. Yes, I'm fine. It wasn't even remotely true, but she had definitively made her choice. As the black sedan pulled away from the ill-fated party venue, Sophia kept a protective, vigilant arm draped around Nico, who slept with his head resting on her lap. In her purse, the black envelope felt like it weighed a ton of lead. She was officially part of this family now, for better or for worse. And she knew, with terrifying certainty, that the storm was only just beginning. Just before dawn broke, the powerful black sedan arrived at Giancarlo's sprawling, beautifully illuminated estate. A drowsy Nico absolutely refused to release Sophia, so she carried him into the dimly lit foyer in her arms. Giancarlo quickly led them upstairs without delay, moving past a concerned staff member whom he quickly reassured with a sharp gesture, and straight to Nico's bedroom suite. Sophia gently lowered Nico onto his massive bed and pulled the soft, down blankets over his small form. The boy immediately curled onto his side, clutching a well-loved stuffed rabbit with one hand. He was sound asleep again in seconds. Giancarlo stood nearby, watching his son, an expression of equal parts deep paternal love and lingering, etched anxiety on his face. When Sophia started to silently slip out of the room, Nico stirred and whimpered faintly. Half awake, Giancarlo gently stroked his son's hair. "I'll be right here, Figlio," he whispered softly. Still, one of Nico's hands reached out blindly until it found and gripped Sophia's sleeve. Even in sleep, he sought her presence. Giancarlo offered Sophia a guest room for the night, but she shook her head firmly. "I'll stay nearby in case he wakes and needs me." So it was settled. Sophia would rest on the large sofa in the small, adjoining lounge area that connected to Nico's room. Giancarlo seemed immensely grateful for her choice. He quietly shut the door of Nico's room partway, leaving it open just enough so they could instantly hear if the boy woke or cried out. They sat together in the gentle, dim glow cast by the lounge's low-burning fireplace. An awkward, heavy silence hung between them, the accumulated trauma of the night catching up. Finally, Giancarlo spoke in a low, resonant tone. "Thank you for everything you did tonight," he said, sincerity and exhaustion heavy in each word. "I know this all happened fast. That proposal was to protect me." Sophia finished for him, offering a small, reassuring smile that felt more genuine than the one she'd given Roberto. "I understand, and I meant what I said when I accepted. I'm here because I care deeply about Nico. I don't regret any of it." A fragile flicker of relief softened Giancarlo's tired eyes. He nodded slowly. "When everyone in that room, my supposed allies, turned on my son and then, immediately turned on you, I realized I had to act. Making you an inviolable part of my family was the only way I could shield you from their malice and spite." Sophia reached over and briefly touched his forearm. A light, comforting pressure. "You don't need to explain, Giancarlo. You did right by Nico, and you did right by me." Giancarlo fell quiet for a long moment, his intense gaze drifting toward the closed door of Nico's room. "He trusts you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than I can possibly say." Sophia sensed a deeper, painful history behind his words. "Because others betrayed that trust before," she said gently, stating the unspoken truth. Giancarlo's face hardened immediately at the reminder of past wounds. He drew a deep, ragged breath. "Yes, you should know. I've not been lucky with those I allowed into our lives." He spoke quietly, staring into the mesmerizing flames. "My first wife, Elysia, could not accept that her son was different. She wanted Nico hidden away, sent off to an institution, a permanent removal. I refused. Our marriage didn't survive it." Sophia's stomach twisted painfully at the brutal thought. Giancarlo continued, his voice flat and detached. "Then came my second wife, Bianca. She seemed to embrace Nico at first, but it was a calculated lie. Behind my back, She routinely drugged him with powerful sedatives to keep him calm and manageable. I discovered it only after he collapsed one night. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped. When I confronted her, Bianca didn't apologize. She left in a cold fury after smashing Nico's favorite sensory toys and scrawling a note that said, "Mothers break boys." As her parting shot, Sophia inhaled sharply, recoiling from the sheer, stunning cruelty. John Carlo's fists were closed, knuckles bone-white resting heavily on his knees. After that, he said hoarsely, "I swore never to let anyone hurt my child again. I kept everyone at arm's length, built walls around us until you." Sophia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She gently laid her hand over one of his tightly clenched fists. "I'm so sorry those things happened to you both," she whispered. "And I understand at least a little." She hesitated, then confessed softly, "My younger brother, Matteo, is autistic too. Years ago, I froze when some bullies hurt him badly. I didn't know how to help, and I've never forgiven myself for that moment of inaction. I promised I'd never stand by helplessly like that again." She looked up, meeting John Carlo's troubled gaze directly. "That promise is why I stepped up for Nico, and I will never let anyone hurt him. I'll protect him with everything I have left." Raw emotion thickened the air between them, filling the small space. John Carlo covered her hand with his other one, squeezing her fingers gently. "I believe you," he said, the words quiet yet absolute, and in his exhausted eyes, Sophia saw a fragile, tenuous hope reawakening. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this time someone truly meant it. In that quiet moment, forged by shared pain and a fierce, immediate love for the same vulnerable boy, an unspoken pact formed between them. Sophia then remembered the black envelope. She pulled the sleek card from her purse and handed it across the space separating them to John Carlo. "This was left for me," she said softly. John Carlo's face darkened instantly as he read the funeral card bearing her name and the chilling, provocative message. His fingers trembled with barely contained, tectonic rage. "Caruso," he growled under his breath, immediately recognizing the cruel, signature handiwork of his rival. He looked back at Sophia, remorse and cold anger mingling profoundly in his expression. "I'm sorry, Sophia. By bringing you into my family, I've made you a high-value target for a man with no concept of honor. But I swear to you, I will not let anyone lay a finger on you." Before Sophia could respond or even absorb his promise, a sharp, urgent knock interrupted them. Roberto stepped in swiftly, his professional eyes flicking between them, assessing the mood. "Don John Carlo, we've confirmed it was Caruso," he reported, his tone clipped. "The man we caught at the party confessed under pressure. This was all part of Caruso's elaborate plan to undermine you at today's commission meeting. He's hoping to provoke you, possibly by targeting Nico or Signorina Sofia again, so that you'll lose control in front of the other bosses." John Carlo absorbed the news with a cold, simmering fury that seemed to radiate heat. Sophia felt a fresh chill at Roberto's words, but immediately, a surge of pure resolve flooded her system. She exchanged a glance with John Carlo. There was fear, yes, but determination, too. Caruso had shown his hand, and now they would be ready for the countermove. "We'll do whatever it takes to keep Nico safe and to not give Caruso what he wants," Sophia said quietly, her chin lifting in challenge. John Carlo nodded, steel glinting in his eyes. "He wants a reaction. He will get nothing but regret." As the harsh morning light began to creep into the sky, Sophia and John Carlo prepared themselves mentally for the trial to come. In a few short hours, they would walk into the Mafia Council meeting side by side, with Nico positioned securely between them, and a dangerous enemy waiting in the shadows. Whatever Caruso attempted next, they would face it together, and they would not allow him to break this family. Later that morning, the Commission of Mafia Dons convened in a stately, immense old council chamber situated on neutral ground, a grandiose, isolated villa tucked away in the hills outside the city. The gathering was formal, tense, and utterly fraught with hidden power plays. Leaders of all the major families sat around a long, ancient mahogany table under a dramatically painted ceiling depicting cherubs and clouds. Giancarlo, as the respected head of the Duca family, took his place near the center. To his right stood Roberto and two other loyal capos. And defying all established precedent, on Giancarlo's left sat Sofia, with Nico nestled close to her side. It was highly irregular, almost unheard of, for a child or a fiancé with no inherent mafia lineage to attend a commission meeting. Giancarlo had insisted, "My son and my future wife are under my personal protection." He had announced imperiously when a few shocked eyebrows had risen at their presence. No one dared object openly, not after word of the previous night's treachery had begun to circulate quietly and rapidly among the families. Sofia was determined not to be a passive bystander or a mere prop. She had spent the car ride over running through her detailed safety plan with Giancarlo and Roberto one last time. Nico now wore a small, carefully packed backpack containing a few critical supplies they'd managed to gather. Noise-canceling headphones, tinted glasses to soften the harsh light, and a favored fidget toy to keep his hands busy. Crucially, Sofia had also programmed a special phrase into Nico's communication tablet. A single, large button that would play a pre-recorded message in Nico's own voice. "I need help." It was their silent, emergency signal should chaos descend and Nico somehow become separated from them. At the council table, Don Luca Caruso sat directly opposite Giancarlo, surveying the room with predatory calm. Caruso was a lean, imposing man with graying hair slicked severely back, and cold, calculating eyes that lingered too long on Nico and Sofia. His lips curved in a polite, chilling smile that never, ever reached those eyes. "Congratulations on your engagement, Giancarlo," Caruso said silkily at one point, his voice just loud enough for all the dons to hear. "And on bringing La Familia to the commission. How progressive of you." It was a thinly veiled, derogatory insult disguised as pleasantry. Giancarlo met Caruso's gaze with an expression of unyielding granite. "Family is everything to me," he replied calmly, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "I keep mine close." The unmistakable double meaning, that Caruso had failed to keep his own enemies close, was clear to everyone present. Caruso's smile flickered violently and then returned, full force. Of course," he nodded, acknowledging the jab. The meeting proceeded, a tense, hours-long discussion of territories and treaty adjustments under an increasingly uneasy veneer of civility. Sofia mostly kept her eyes either fixed on Nico or subtly scanning the entire room, searching for any sign of Caruso's plot unfolding. Nico sat in a large cushioned chair situated between her and his father, drawing intently on a notepad Sofia had given him. The low, guttural murmur of debate around them created a constant, droning background hum, but Nico seemed to handle it adequately under Sofia's watchful, proactive care. Still, Sofia's pulse remained elevated. She rehearsed her contingency plan mentally. Asterisk if anything happens. Loud noises, sudden commotion, headphones on Nico, then hold him tight and move out the side door to the small antechamber. Asterisk she had spotted it on their walk-in. It was designated as a break room for attendees and would conveniently be empty during the main session. That would be their secure safe space. Roberto had stationed one of his most trusted men in that antechamber already, just in case. More than once, Sofia caught Luca Caruso glancing down at his wristwatch, as if anticipating an exact moment. Each time he did, he would then cast a brief, expectant look toward the far end of the room where a pair of servers stood ready to attend to refreshments. The servers were strangers to Sofia, likely local staff hired by the hosting family for the event. She felt a distinct tightening in her gut. Could Caruso's people be among them? She leaned subtly toward Giancarlo and whispered, "The two waiters by the door. Do you know them?" Giancarlo's eyes flicked up, assessing them instantly. "No, they belong to the hosting family staff," he murmured back, barely moving his lips. Sofia nodded, but her unease grew exponentially. She noticed one of the waiters tapping his foot repeatedly and nervously, his eyes darting back and forth between Caruso and a large antique clock mounted on the wall. Nico shifted suddenly in his seat, drawing Sofia's immediate attention. He had put down his notepad and was squinting, rubbing his ears roughly. Sophia tensed. Was he picking up on something subtle that she hadn't yet registered? Across the table, Don Caruso raised a manicured hand. "Signori, perhaps a short recess," he suggested smoothly. "We've been at this all morning. A break will surely do us good before we tackle the final, crucial agenda." The other dons murmured agreement. A pause was customary in long, tense meetings. Giancarlo checked on Nico, who was now visibly covering one ear completely. Giancarlo frowned. He heard nothing unusual yet, but he deeply trusted his son's instincts. Sophia trusted them too. She quietly slid the padded, noise-canceling headphones from Nico's backpack and prepared to place them over his ears. The chairman of the commission, a stoic old man named Don Massimo, gave a curt nod. "5-minute recess," he declared, tapping a gavel lightly. Chairs scraped loudly as men stood, stretching their legs. Some immediately headed into the hallway to make calls or use facilities. Caruso remained seated, pulling out a sleek cigar leisurely, though Sophia noticed he didn't actually light it. His eyes flicked to the nervous waiter, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod in return. In the next instant, multiple synchronized things happened at once. The ornate chandelier lights went out with a startling pop, plunging the chamber into semi-darkness, lit only by slivers of pale daylight filtering from the high windows. Simultaneously, a deafening, abrasive fire alarm bell began clanging violently through the halls. A deliberate, piercing trigger designed purely for panic. And underneath that cacophony, Sophia caught it. The telltale keening hum, faint at first but instantly growing, the same punishing high-frequency sound that had emanated from the birthday gift device. It was a perfectly executed ambush of sound and darkness. Nico cried out, an immediate, panicked sound, slapping his hands over his ears and doubling over in acute pain. But Sophia was ready. In one fluid, practiced motion, she slid the padded headphones over Nico's ears, muffling the worst of the sudden, aggressive noise assault. With her other hand, she grabbed the boy and pulled him tightly against her, simultaneously sliding them both down and under the protection of the heavy mahogany table. I'm here, she whispered urgently, even as her own heart hammered in terror. Shadows moved chaotically around the room. Some of the dons cursed loudly in surprise at the alarm, fumbling blindly for the nearest exits or turning to their bodyguards. A few emergency backup lights flickered on, casting long, eerie, yellowish beams across the room. Sophia! Giancarlo's voice sounded loudly from above. He had not strayed far during the recess and was already lunging back toward them instead of seeking cover himself. She peered out from under the table to see him silhouetted in the dim, chaotic light. We're okay, Sophia shouted over the sustained clamor, lifting one hand to signal him. Under the table, Nico was whimpering, shaking uncontrollably, but holding together thanks entirely to the headphones and Sophia's firm, comforting arm around him. That damned hum was intensifying, now audible even through the frantic fire alarm. Sophia could see Nico squeezing his eyes shut, hands clamped over the protective headphones. He could probably still feel the damaging vibration. They had to move immediately as planned. Safe room, Sophia called to Giancarlo, ensuring her voice carried. Take us there now. He instantly understood. He reached under the table and, together, they pulled Nico out and up. Giancarlo wrapped his arm around both his son and Sophia, ushering them swiftly and forcefully toward the side door she had identified. Around them, the chamber was a scene of disarray. Somebody bumped into Giancarlo violently in the darkness, muttering hurried apologies. Two guards were yelling confused instructions about the alarm possibly being false. Amidst it all, Sophia glimpsed a figure, the nervous waiter, darting toward the main conference table where briefcases and documents lay scattered. Asterisk not now. Asterisk focus entirely on Nico, she ordered herself. Roberto appeared out of the gloom like a phantom, waving them urgently toward the antechamber Sophia had identified earlier. He must have fought through the panicked crowd just to reach them. This way, he barked, urgency in his voice, They plunged into the side room and slammed the heavy door shut, effectively cutting off the chaotic noise. The alarm was more muffled here, and a blissful, sudden silence met Sophia's ears as Roberto jammed a thumb on the antechamber's master circuit breaker, which instantly killed the hum device's frequency. Or perhaps some sophisticated jammer he carried did the trick. Either way, in this small, quiet room, the sudden cessation of noise felt like a total vacuum after the sensory overload outside. Sophia immediately crouched down to face Nico. The boy was shaking violently, tears tracking down his cheeks, but his eyes were still open, aware. He had not melted down. He was frightened, but conscious and holding on to Sophia's jacket with a desperate death grip. Sophia stroked his hair and murmured soothingly, "It's okay, sweetheart. The loud noises are gone. You did so well." Nico's lower lip trembled. He reached for his tablet with unsteady, struggling hands. Sophia realized he was trying to communicate. She helped hold it steady as he managed to press the emergency button she'd prepared earlier. In the sudden quiet of the room, the tablet speaker intoned softly, in a small recorded voice, "Asterisk, I need help." Her heart broke and swelled all at once. Even through his fear, Nico remembered the plan. "I know, honey. Help is here," she assured him, pulling him into a gentle but firm hug. Giancarlo knelt beside them, placing a powerful, protective arm around his son from the other side. "You're safe, Nico," he said firmly, kissing the top of the boy's head. He met Sophia's eyes over Nico's shoulder. The look conveyed equal parts profound gratitude and a terrifying fury at whoever had orchestrated this. Roberto was already on his comms unit. "Lock the estate down. Check all personnel now," he ordered tersely into the microphone. Through the heavy door, they could still hear confusion reigning in the main hall, though the alarm bell had cut off abruptly. Someone must have deactivated it once it was confirmed as false. A minute later, one of Roberto's men knocked and entered. "Don Giancarlo, all the bosses are fine. It was a false alarm as suspected. Power is being restored now." Giancarlo's face was thunderous. "And Caruso?" The guard grimaced slightly. "Don Caruso was in the hallway when it happened. He's complaining loudly about security lapses. In other words, putting on a highly theatrical show of indignation." Giancarlo exchanged a cold, knowing look with Roberto. They both knew Caruso was the source of this elaborate charade, but proving it was another matter entirely. Sophia's mind, however, flashed back to that figure she'd seen darting toward the table in the chaos. "Someone was by the table," she said quickly, urgency lacing her voice. "I think they were trying to steal something or plant something." Roberto's man nodded instantly. "We caught a staffer with his hand in Don Giancarlo's briefcase. He bolted when confronted, but we apprehended him." "Good," Giancarlo growled. "What did he take?" "Nothing, sir, but we found this on him." The guard held up a tiny object between his fingers. A slim USB drive, likely an attempt to download critical files from your case or plant spyware deep within your devices. Roberto took the device, his expression grim and dangerous. They used the alarm and the sound attack as cover for an espionage play. Sophia felt a surge of cold, focused anger. Caruso hadn't just wanted to disrupt the meeting to hurt Nico emotionally. That was merely a convenient bonus. His main objective was theft. Stealing sensitive operational information that might have been exchanged during the private meeting, or perhaps critical financial data. The chaos served as the perfect smokescreen. Simultaneously, he had hoped to create a scene dramatic enough to unnerve Giancarlo and perhaps even snag an opportunity to snatch the boy. Nico tugged insistently on Sophia's sleeve, drawing her attention back to the present moment. He pointed first to his ears, then around the room, his eyes wide and clearly asking, without need of words, if the danger had finally passed. Sophia carefully peeked out the door, her senses hyper-alert. The villa's opulent lights were returning to full brilliance now. The main chamber beyond was settling back into uneasy quiet, though a heavy, acrid tension still charged the air, thick as smoke. "It's over, Nico. We're safe," she murmured, easing the noise-canceling headphones off his small head. He kept his hands clamped over his ears for a lingering moment, waiting for the return of the awful, high-pitched whine. Only when he was sure the buzzing had truly ceased did he slowly lower his hands. The heavy door to the main hall was now wide open, and through it, they could hear Don Massimo's voice, ringing loudly with irritation, demanding immediate order. One by one, the commission bosses and their entourages filed back in, visibly rattled but physically unharmed. Giancarlo stood up, immediately sweeping Nico into his arms, burying his face in the boy's neck in an open, undeniable display of comfort and paternal love. He was past caring about any disapproving or archaic glances from the other men. In fact, as Giancarlo, Sofia, and Nico emerged from the side room, some of the other dons regarded the Duca family with a certain newfound respect. Word had quickly spread through the room that Giancarlo's woman, the new outsider, had expertly shielded the boy during the crisis. Not all were sympathetic, this world rarely was, but a few elder men gave slow, deliberate nods that seemed to acknowledge both Giancarlo's trials in defending his son and Sofia's astonishing nerve under fire. Luca Caruso returned a moment later with a full retinue of his own men in tow, clapping his hands together with forced, booming theatricality. "Well, that was quite the disruption," he announced, coding his words in an oily, jovial tone that fooled no one. "Everyone all right? Good, good." His calculating gaze landed first on Giancarlo, who was still holding Nico close, and then lingered on Sofia standing resolutely at their side. Caruso manufactured a concerned frown. "So sorry your boy had to endure that, Giancarlo. Terrible oversight and security here, isn't it? We ought to file a formal complaint." Giancarlo's answering stare was frigid, the pure, uncut embodiment of silent threat. "Spare me," he delivered under his breath, too low for the whole room to catch, but audible enough for Caruso's smug grin to flicker momentarily. Don Massimo's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the mounting tension. "We will investigate this incident fully. In the meantime, if all are safe, I propose we conclude the day's meeting now and reconvene tomorrow to address any unfinished matters once we are not so distracted." No one raised an objection. It was an abrupt, unsatisfying end to the proceedings, but entirely understandable given the circumstances. As chairs scraped back and hurried farewells were exchanged, Sofia stayed anchored close to Giancarlo and Nico. Her entire body was humming, vibrating with the residual rush of adrenaline, but they had made it through the fire. Nico clung fiercely to his father, his face buried against Giancarlo's broad shoulder. Now that the immediate crisis was past and the reaction was setting in, Sofia gently rubbed the child's back in long, soothing strokes. Luca Caruso caught Sofia's eye from across the table. He paused, tipped his head ever so slightly in a mockery of a salute, and a ghost of a predatory smile touched his lips. The gesture sent a cold, sharp bolt of warning directly through her. This round had ended in chaotic deadlock, but he was absolutely not finished. She could feel the lingering threat like a physical shadow. Outside, luxury armored cars were already being brought around by drivers, pulling into the circular drive. The commission members were eager to leave this compromised, disgraced venue. Roberto escorted their trio out a discreet side door to avoid the lingering crowds and the press of minor dons trying to curry favor. The afternoon sun was high and intensely bright, making Sofia squint as they stepped into the open air. Giancarlo carefully settled Nico into the back seat of their armored sedan, and Sofia slid in beside the boy. Just as Giancarlo moved to follow them into the car, a uniformed attendant hurried over, clutching something small and white. "Don Giancarlo, this was just found for you," the man called, extending a small, pristine white envelope. It bore Giancarlo's name scrawled across the front in an ornate, looping script. Giancarlo tensed visibly, exchanging a grim, knowing glance with Roberto. He took the envelope, tore it open with a single, sharp motion, and extracted a single sheet of paper. His eyes narrowed to dangerous slits as he quickly scanned the message. Sofia leaned in, peering over his arm. There were only a few chilling words, typed, not handwritten. "Tomorrow, the commission will watch you kneel while they film your new madre." Sophia's blood ran instantly cold despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Madre, that word again, the calculated use of the familial term, twisted into a threat. She felt Nico's small hand creep into hers, perhaps sensing the sudden, visceral dread radiating from the adults. Giancarlo crushed the note into a tight, white-knuckled fist, his face pale with barely contained rage. Roberto stepped immediately closer, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Caruso, he muttered, the name a curse. There was zero doubt who was behind this final, cruel warning. Giancarlo gently pushed Sophia and Nico the rest of the way into the heavily armored car's interior. "We'll be ready," he stated, though his voice was strained and rough. Sophia squeezed his hand as he settled in next to her. Inside, she was terrified, but that fear was swiftly being overtaken by a profound, burning fury. Caruso was planning to twist their love for Nico and their burgeoning connection into a deadly weapon. They absolutely could not allow that to happen. As the car smoothly pulled away from the Grand Villa, Giancarlo unfolded his phone and began issuing rapid, clipped orders to Roberto and other commanders. Increased security measures. New, radically different plans for the next day's meeting. Contingency piled upon contingency. Sophia held Nico tightly, her jaw set in hard determination. Tomorrow was already bearing down on them, and with it, Caruso's promised vicious attack. Sophia silently prayed for the strength they would need to endure it. If the previous night and today had proven anything, it was that she, Giancarlo, and Nico formed a surprisingly formidable, cohesive team. Caruso thought he could make the lion of the Duca family kneel. He thought he could turn the new mother into a weeping victim. Sophia's eyes hardened, reflecting the passing sunlight. "We'll see about that," she vowed inwardly. Back at the sprawling Duca estate that evening, an unsettling hush lay over the house. After the intensely tumultuous day, Nico had finally fallen into an exhausted, deep sleep upstairs. Sophia sat at the foot of his massive bed in the soft glow of the nightlight, gently stroking his back through the covers. Nico's breathing was steady and even now, but only a few hours earlier, he had woken screaming from a nightmare, no doubt reliving the harsh, blaring alarm and the ensuing chaos. Sophia had rushed to his side instantly, soothing him with quiet words and humming a familiar lullaby until his wrenching sobs subsided completely. Through it all, Giancarlo had stood like a shadow by the doorway, watching with a deeply pained expression, as if every single cry cut him deeply, and every soft lullaby note from Sophia was a balm applied directly to his own open wound. When Nico finally drifted off again into quiet slumber, Giancarlo stepped silently into the room and draped a soft cashmere blanket over Sophia's shoulders. "You should rest too," he murmured, his voice heavy with fatigue. Sophia shook her head slightly, keeping her own voice low. "Maybe in a bit. I just want to be absolutely sure he's fully settled." She gave Nico's shoulder one last comforting pat, then rose, following Giancarlo out of the room. He pulled the heavy door nearly shut, leaving it open just a crack for observation. In the dim hall light, Giancarlo hesitated, then spoke, his words difficult for him to utter. "I owe you an apology." Sophia looked up at him, genuinely surprised by the unexpected humility. His face was drawn, etched with exhaustion, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "For what?" "For putting you and Nico in danger today." "For all of this," Giancarlo replied, gesturing vaguely at the air around them. He didn't just mean the events of the day, but the entire perilous situation they were now immersed in. "Caruso is targeting you directly because of the choice I made. Last night, I acted to protect you, but in doing so, I also painted a bullseye on your back. I'm sorry." Sophia studied his face closely in the low light. This proud, powerful, feared man was clearly, genuinely guilt-ridden. She gave him a small, sad smile and touched his arm lightly, reassuringly. "You did what your heart told you to do. You protected Nico and me in the best way you knew how. I won't second-guess that decision, and I certainly don't regret it." Giancarlo covered her hand with his grip warm and solid. "Still, you've been through hell in just a single day of being a part of my family. Most women would have run far away by now. "I'm not most people," Sophia said gently, her eyes serious, "and Nico is worth every bit of it." At that, Giancarlo managed a faint, genuine smile. A mixture of profound gratitude and something far warmer shone in his dark eyes. For a split second, it looked as though he might pull her into a tight, close embrace, but he abruptly restrained himself. Both of them were hyper-aware of the delicate, crucial balance between them. There was no time for personal indulgence, no room for blurring boundaries, not with danger still squarely on their doorstep. "Nico comes first," Sophia added softly, reinforcing the unspoken boundary they both needed. "Until he's safe, that is all that matters." Giancarlo nodded, deep respect evident in his gaze. "Agreed." They moved toward Giancarlo's private study farther down the hall, where Roberto and a few trusted capos were already waiting. The heavy oak doors closed, sealing them inside, and the final, meticulous plans for the next day's confrontation began to take shape. On the wide, mahogany desk lay a damning array of evidence collected rapidly over the last 24 hours. Roberto had spread everything out like an arsenal of grievances. There was the dismantled, humming frequency device from the birthday party. A printed record of the threatening text message, which one of Giancarlo's tech experts had pulled from a confiscated burner phone belonging to a known Caruso man at the party. The micro USB drive and schematics of the surveillance bug seized from the meeting staffer. There were even crisp, still photos pulled from the villa's security cameras, showing the so-called waiters, Caruso's men, sneaking around the circuit breaker during the blackout. "Caruso's fingerprints are all over these incidents," Roberto stated, chin raised with grim, hard-won satisfaction. "Enough to convince the commission?" one of the capos anxiously asked. "Possibly," Giancarlo said. He stood rigidly at the desk, arms crossed over his chest. "But only if we catch Caruso in an undeniable, blatant act. Right now, this is strong circumstantial evidence. Caruso will simply feign complete innocence, claim it's a setup, or blame rogue elements." Roberto nodded decisively. "Which is precisely why tomorrow we allow him the space to overstep in front of all the dons. We let him completely incriminate himself." A heavy, anticipatory silence followed those chilling words. Sophia felt a fresh wave of coldness thinking of the note Caruso had sent, promising to make Giancarlo kneel and to film her. He intended something dramatic, public, and utterly vile. She took a deep, steadying breath. "We know he plans to target me, to use me to break Giancarlo's composure," she said, her voice even and level despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "So we use that knowledge." Giancarlo tensed immediately. "Sophia." She met his eyes firmly. "I'll be the bait if I have to be. We all know it's a trap. The crucial difference is that this time, we'll be prepared for every move he makes." Giancarlo looked as though he wanted desperately to protest her taking such a risk, but he couldn't logically refute her reasoning. Instead, he shifted the topic to Nico's vital contribution. "Nico noticed something important," he said, motioning for Sophia to pass him the large tablet that sat on the desk. Earlier that evening, once Nico had finally calmed down from his distress, he had insisted on telling them something using his AAC device. Sophia had been astonished and immensely proud. In halting phrases and with some spelling assistance, Nico had communicated, "Same man at party, same smell." At first, Sophia hadn't fully understood, but Giancarlo instantly had. He explained that Nico possessed an incredibly keen sense of smell. The boy often remembered people, especially strangers, by scent as much as by sight. Nico had apparently recognized that one of the waiters involved in today's blackout smelled exactly the same as someone he'd noticed lingering suspiciously at his birthday party. With some gentle further coaxing, Nico had confirmed through his device that it was the man who had stood by the column, texting furiously, just before the chaos at the party began. It was a breakthrough clue. One of Caruso's trusted operatives had been physically present at the scene of both attempted incidents. Giancarlo handed the glowing tablet to Roberto now, the simple words still on the screen. "That waiter we caught. Get someone to verify his identity and background by morning. I suspect he's one of Caruso's inner crew operating under a fake name." "I'm already on it," Roberto confirmed immediately. The man's being interrogated as we speak. Sophia shuddered briefly at the thought of what interrogation might entail in this world. But she quickly steeled herself. These were dangerous, calculating criminals intent on murder and ruin. Handling them gently was simply not an option. They spent the next hour meticulously refining their counterplan. Giancarlo would attend the reconvened commission meeting with Sophia and Nico again at his side. Caruso would expect nothing less than caution, allowing him to think his threat had made them wary, but not wary enough to change their established routine. However, this time, Giancarlo had quietly coordinated with Don Massimo, the commission chairman, to subtly tighten security and to allow Giancarlo specific leeway to respond decisively to any shenanigans. As the old Don colorfully put it, without immediate reprisal. Massimo was a traditionalist who thoroughly disliked chaos and incompetence at his meetings. The clear evidence of yesterday's treachery had profoundly angered him. While he stopped short of accusing Caruso without absolute proof, he gave Giancarlo a nod of approval to handle matters, so long as the proof became evident in the process. Additionally, Giancarlo's men would thoroughly infiltrate the venue early in the morning. Some would pose convincingly as venue staff, keeping vigilant eyes on Caruso's contingent. Tiny, discreet hidden cameras and sophisticated audio recorders would be placed at key strategic spots, especially around where Sophia might be during breaks or recesses, as that was the likely moment Caruso would choose to strike. Lastly, Giancarlo had one more crucial surprise prepared. He revealed a slim, highly specialized device to Sophia, a small, custom-built signal jammer and detector developed by his tech specialists overnight. This, he explained, holding the smooth metal device, will block any high-frequency emitters Caruso tries to use, and also detect their source instantly. If the hum starts, it'll pinpoint the origin immediately and broadcast a warning signal. He gave a meaningful look to Sophia. We'll sync it with Nico's tablet. So if it senses that cursed frequency tomorrow, Nico's AAC will flash an alert, maybe even prominently display the word HUM. He'll know we're about to stop it, and Caruso's crew won't get the jump on us with the chaos it causes. Sophia felt a sudden swell of emotion, pride in Nico's unique contributions being woven so seamlessly into the complex plan, and profound admiration for Giancarlo's proactive cunning. She reached out and squeezed Giancarlo's hand. We're ready, she affirmed. He turned his palm to clasp her hand in return, the brief touch conveying everything that was left unsaid. Gratitude, concern, determination, and mutual commitment. Roberto coughed discreetly, and they quickly parted, refocusing back on the business at hand. When the strategy was fully set and the night grew deep, Giancarlo insisted Sophia get some sleep. We need you sharp tomorrow, he gently admonished. I need you safe. She didn't argue. Exhaustion was a heavy weight pulling at her bones. She checked on Nico one more time, now sleeping peacefully, before retiring to the sofa in his lounge once again. As she drifted off, Sophia thought of Luca Caruso and his malice. You have no idea what awaits you, she thought bitterly. They would turn his carefully crafted evil plan against him. The next day, promptly at noon, the commission gathered once more in the Grand Villa's hall. A powerful sense of unfinished, volatile business crackled heavily in the air. The Dons seated themselves much as before, though an acute undertone of anxious anticipation lingered. The bizarre events of the prior day had everyone distinctly on edge. Sophia felt the tension pressing in on her, like static electricity before a storm. She was dressed conservatively in a charcoal suit jacket and slacks that Giancarlo had provided, to look the part of a Donna, he'd said with a rare, fleeting half-smile. Under the table, her foot tapped nervously against the floor, but outwardly she maintained a flawless, composed facade. Nico sat close to her again, his protective headphones tucked safely in the backpack at his feet, his tablet resting on the table before him with the special alert function running silently in the background. Caruso arrived a bit late, striding in with an overtly apologetic bow to Don Massimo. He gave Giancarlo a tight-lipped, venomous smile and inclined his head to Sophia with a sickeningly faux courtesy. She noticed his eyes sweep the room quickly, assessing every variable. No doubt he was checking if anything had changed that might foil his pending plan. The meeting proceeded to its final agenda items, updates on enforcement of territories, mediation of a minor dispute between two lesser families. Mundane, tedious topics that starkly belied the undercurrent of dread Sophia felt. Caruso spoke up at times, sounding measured and entirely reasonable. No one observing him would guess the malicious, calculating intent hidden beneath his well-groomed exterior. But Giancarlo was not as placid as yesterday. Sophia could sense the barely leashed anger coiled within him. He was like a powerful lion pacing silently in his cage, awaiting the precise moment to pounce. He said little, only what protocol strictly required, his hand occasionally coming to rest on Nico's shoulder, as if to remind himself of the high stakes they were playing for. Half an hour in, Don Massimo called for a short recess. He, too, seemed visibly anxious to get through the day's business. Sophia's pulse quickened dramatically. This was it. Yesterday's attack had come during the recess. If Caruso was to strike, it would be now. As people rose and began to mill about, Sophia exchanged a quick, knowing look with Giancarlo. He gave her a tiny, affirmative nod. Showtime. This time, Sophia did not stay glued to Giancarlo's side. Instead, she excused herself to slip into the hallway, carrying a slim folder of documents as if she planned to review them or make a private phone call. It was a crucial part of the lure. She was deliberately giving Caruso a tempting window where she appeared isolated from Giancarlo and presumably unguarded. In reality, Roberto's most trusted men were stationed subtly along the corridor and in adjacent, unused rooms, watching her every move. Giancarlo ostentatiously remained in the conference hall, talking expansively with Don Massimo, projecting an air of complete nonchalance. Though Sophia knew his eyes were tracking her every movement through the doorway. Nico stayed calmly at the table with his father. They decided not to move the boy during the recess. Instead, one of the most trusted capos, Fabricio, casually sat next to the boy, showing him a small spinning top toy to keep him engaged and calm. From the outside, it looked as if Giancarlo was simply delegating child-minding for a moment. In truth, Fabricio was heavily armed and ready to instantaneously whisk Nico out of harm's way if necessary. Sophia walked down the corridor a short distance, pretending to read the papers in her folder. The villa's elaborate design featured several deep alcoves and a cross-hallway, plenty of blind spots for an ambush. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Any second now. The lights went out. This time, not just the conference hall, but the corridor lights, too, plunged into immediate, thick darkness. Simultaneously, Sophia heard the beginnings of a high-pitched, metallic whine. It barely started its crescendo when, from back in the main room, Nico's tablet, linked via remote signal to Giancarlo's jammer, lit up bright and bold. Even through the heavy wall, Sophia could hear its childlike, electronic voice suddenly exclaim, "HM!" The loud warning came an instant before a muffled, furious curse rang out in the blackness. Caruso's voice, enraged. Giancarlo's jammer had performed its job flawlessly. After the initial technological blip, the agonizing hum cut off almost immediately, cleanly squashed by the powerful counterfrequencies. Their side had seized the technological upper hand, and Caruso realized it instantly. Sophia's pulse raced frantically. She flattened herself against the cool wall, the folder clutched to her chest, trying to make herself the smallest possible target now that the trap was successfully sprung. Her eyes struggled painfully to adjust to the pitch black, but she caught movement ahead. 2, maybe 3 figures were rushing into the hallway from a side door. Luca Caruso's hissed whisper echoed clearly in the darkness. "Find the woman now." The conference hall immediately erupted into a predictable chorus of shouts and chaos as Caruso's desperate order echoed out. Sophia pressed herself flat against the plaster wall. Her heart thundered, but she forced herself into absolute, stone-cold calm. This was the exact moment their meticulously laid trap would either successfully spring or fail spectacularly. Heavy footsteps thudded as Caruso's men fanned out in the corridor, blindly searching for her. One of them clicked on a small flashlight, the beam slicing violently through the black. It swung wildly, finally landing on Sophia's figure pressed against the wall. "Here!" a rough voice barked. Sophia felt a sharp surge of fear as two silhouettes rapidly closed in within the dim flashlight glare. She recognized one as the jittery waiter from the day before, now brandishing a handgun equipped with a massive silencer. The other held a small video recorder, its tiny red light glaring menacingly. They intended to seize her quickly and record whatever humiliation they had planned for Giancarlo. "Don't move, girl," the one with the gun hissed, grabbing Sophia's arm brutally. His fingers bit painfully into her flesh. The man with the camera moved to train the lens directly on her face. Sophia winced involuntarily but refused to cry out. In the back of her mind, her deceased brother Mateo's voice from long ago came to her. Stay brave, soft. She lifted her chin, meeting the camera's gaze with a hard glare, refusing absolutely to show terror. Caruso wanted her screaming and humiliated. She would deny him that satisfaction entirely. Before the thug could drag her 2 steps further, the corridor suddenly exploded with noise and overwhelming light. Giancarlo's jammer activation had been the precise signal for their counterattack. Emergency lights blazed on as full power was immediately and intentionally restored by their tech teams, and a thunder of heavy footsteps signaled Roberto's men rushing in from both ends of the hall simultaneously. "Drop your weapons." Roberto's roar was accompanied by the very real, terrifying sound of half a dozen guns being cocked and readied. In the sudden illumination, half a dozen of Giancarlo's guards appeared like phantoms out of nowhere, all weapons leveled instantly at Caruso's small crew. The man holding Sophia faltered, his grip loosening in shock and disbelief. Sophia seized the chance. Just as Mateo's therapist had taught her long ago for emergency self-defense, she drove the point of her heel down hard onto the instep of her captor's foot. He yelped in sharp pain and stumbled sideways. Sophia instantly wrenched free, twisting away from the still-aimed gun. In a flash, Fabricio, who had already left Nico safely under Don Massimo's protection inside the conference room, lunged forward and slammed the nearest man. Gunman hard onto the marble floor. The camera-wielding fool tried to sprint away, only for one of Giancarlo's loyalists, a massive man whose suit barely contained his muscle, to deliver a brutal clothesline. The thud of impact echoed, sending the expensive recording apparatus skittering and clattering across the polished marble. Luca Caruso, witnessing his carefully constructed scheme dissolve into chaos, burst from the conference room. A heavy-caliber pistol gleamed menacingly in his hand. His face, usually controlled, was a mask of incandescent fury, twisted by the sight of his elite men subdued and Sophia, his desired leverage, free. For a single terrifying instant, his eyes locked onto Sophia's. The intent behind that glare was not just anger, but cold-blooded murder. If the evidence was lost, she would be the sacrificial lamb. He raised the pistol, sighting down the barrel, but before his finger could tighten, the brutal, cold pressure of Roberto's handgun barrel slammed against the sensitive back of Caruso's skull. "Don't," Roberto growled, his voice a low, lethal vibration. Behind him, 2 more of Giancarlo's trusted guards flanked Caruso, weapons steadily drawn. The corridor instantly fell into an eerie, suffocating silence, broken only by the ragged sound of Caruso's heavy, panicked breathing. Sophia slowly exhaled the breath she had been locking in her chest. She was alive, miraculously unharmed, and Caruso was definitively trapped. "What in God's name is the meaning of this circus?" Don Massimo's voice, usually a grave rumble, was now a roaring tempest that sliced through the sudden, fragile silence. He hobbled into the corridor, leaning heavily on a cane carved from ebony, followed by a procession of other ranking dons and their imposing personal guards. They absorbed the tableau. Sophia, pale but defiantly upright. Caruso, disarmed and utterly at the mercy of Giancarlo's forces. His thugs pinned like captured insects, their weaponry and surveillance gadgets strewn across the luxurious floor. Giancarlo, his jaw set hard, finally appeared, elbowing past 2 disapproving elder dons to face Caruso directly. Trailing just behind him was Nico, escorted carefully by one of Massimo's trusted aides. The boy's eyes were enormous with fear and confusion, but the moment he sighted Sophia, he rushed forward, wrapping his small, trembling arms tightly around her waist. Sophia immediately sank onto her knees, pulling him into a desperate, fierce embrace. "I'm okay, Tesoro," she murmured into his hair, her voice cracking with the sheer, blinding relief. "We're both okay." Caruso, finding his voice, spat venom into the confrontation. "This is an outrage, an ambush. Giancarlo set me up." He tried to pull free, but Roberto's forearm tightened, the cold metal biting harder into his scalp, freezing him instantly. Giancarlos's response was lethally measured. "Yes, I laid a trap, Caruso, because I had to catch a snake." He gave a curt nod to Roberto, who slightly eased his pressure, allowing Caruso to slowly turn and face the assembled, astonished commission. Don Massimo's ancient, hawk-like eyes flared with intense anger. "Explain yourselves, both of you, now," he demanded. Giancarlos did not hesitate, speaking before Caruso could gather his wits. "Luca Caruso has, within 48 hours, attempted to destroy my family twice. He used the cover of these sacred commission meetings to attempt kidnapping, extortion, and far worse dishonor." He swept a hand toward the subdued men on the floor. "We anticipated his desperation would force him to try again today, and we took measures to end his treachery." "This is a despicable lie," Caruso shrieked. He forced a semblance of composure, smoothing the lapels of his suit with hands that now trembled only slightly. Addressing the collective bosses, he adopted a tone of injured dignity. "The alarm yesterday, the scuffle today, I am being framed. Giancarlo cannot produce one shred of genuine evidence that I orchestrated any of this." A low, skeptical murmuring spread among the observers. By the deep-seated traditions of their world, accusations lacking hard, physical evidence could always be dismissed as pise, unsubstantiated rumor or baseless revenge. Sophia slowly rose to her feet, still anchoring Nico's small hand in hers, and stepped decisively into the clearing. "We can prove it," she stated, her voice clear and carrying, silencing the room instantly. All attention snapped to the young woman who, only a week ago, had been an outsider, a nobody in their world. Don Massimo arched a slow, skeptical silver brow, but Giancarlo offered Sophia a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of support. Roberto had already efficiently recovered the scattered camera and the specialized small devices from Caruso's henchmen's pockets. Within minutes, Giancarlos's tech expert, a sharp-eyed man previously obscured among the uniformed guards, had the footage cued. He played it back for the entire assembly on the camera's articulating flip screen. The images were grainy, dark, but horrifyingly legible. Sophia struggling violently in the grip of two of Caruso's armed goons. One clearly held a weapon while the other filmed the terrifying ordeal. The date stamp confirmed the recording had been made literally minutes prior, within the confines of the estate. Gasps of shock echoed around the room. Even bosses previously allied with Caruso instinctively recoiled, taking a step away from him. Caruso's complexion immediately leached of color. "This proves nothing of my involvement," he stammered, though glistening sweat betrayed his panic. "It proves your men attempted to kidnap and film my fiancée right here, under the commission's own roof," Giancarlo countered icily. He gestured to Roberto, who began systematically arranging additional evidence on a hastily cleared coffee table. One by one, Giancarlo and Sophia laid out the damning puzzle pieces. The humming device, its unique frequency signature matching one purchased by a shell corporation traced directly to Caruso's finances. The threatening text message sent during Nico's party, traced to a burner phone recovered from Caruso's thug. The tearful testimony of the waiter-turned-thug, now sobbing miserably under guard, that Caruso himself had ordered him to trigger the alarm and attempt to bug the meeting. While much of this evidence was technical and complex, one piece cut through the complexity with devastating clarity. Nico himself. Nico, who had been silently observing and listening, pressed close to Sophia, seemed to sense the moment had arrived for him to speak. He gently pulled away from Sophia and walked to the table where his AC tablet rested. With all eyes riveted on him, many startled to see the child take such initiative, Nico tapped the screen with solemn determination. A synthesized voice, utterly innocent and unnervingly monotone, broke the stunned silence. They put hum on us. Sophia felt a sharp sting of tears behind her eyes. She moved quickly to Nico's side as he initiated the next phrase. They said, "Film me." A collective, horrified murmur swept through the assembled crowd of hardened men. Nico's earnest face scrunched in deep concentration. His small finger hit the next preset phrase that Sophia and he had prepared earlier that morning. "They want Papa Neil." At that utterance, Don Massimo's weathered jaw visibly clenched. Other elders exchanged horrified, disgusted glances. For a boss to be brought to his knees through filmed coercion, Luca Caruso had intended to violate the sacred code of honor in the absolute worst way, by exploiting a vulnerable child and a woman. Finally, Nico added a phrase born entirely of his own spirit. He typed slowly but clearly with one hand, then hit the speak button. The voice announced, "Sophia safe." Tears streamed freely down Sophia's face now. In those two profound words, Nico had conveyed to this hardened, skeptical audience that Sophia had shielded him, that she was not merely an outsider, but the protector who had ensured the Don's heir remained safe throughout this nightmare. Giancarlo's composure nearly shattered. He quickly dashed a hand across his eyes and proudly rested his hand on Nico's shoulder. There was hardly a dry eye among the onlookers, including some of the toughest, oldest Dons who had grandchildren of their own. Publicly hearing a vulnerable child voice the treachery he endured, and affirm the woman who defended him, carried infinitely more weight than any technical report or gadget. Luca Caruso looked utterly ruined, his mouth working silently, realizing there was no possible escape from this inescapable knot. Don Massimo cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet, his voice regaining its stern authority. "Luca Caruso," he pronounced, his tone heavy with irreversible finality. "We have heard and seen enough. You have shattered the most sacred codes of our governance, endangering the child of a Don, attempting to dishonor a family through cowardly, technological acts. You are no brother to us." He shook his head slowly, feigning a deep, genuine sorrow. "You are cast out from this commission." "No, Massimo, wait." Caruso blanched. Every ounce of bravado evaporated instantly. Two of the bosses previously allied with him abruptly stepped away, treating him as though he carried a highly contagious plague. One elder swiftly made the sign of the cross over his chest. Giancarlo stood tall, Sophia and Nico forming an unbreakable unit beside him. His voice was low, carrying a dangerous, chilling edge of satisfaction. "Your territory and all operations are forfeit, Caruso, as decided by this commission." Don Massimo offered a solemn nod of confirmation. "So it is. You will depart immediately under escort. What judgment follows will be in strict accordance with our laws." His deliberately vague phrasing thinly veiled the terrifying reality. Caruso might exit this hall alive, but he would certainly not live out the week once true Mafia justice was meted out. Two of Don Massimo's massive enforcers stepped forward instantly, seizing Luca Caruso by the arms. He struggled once, briefly, before his body went slack in total defeat. As Caruso was roughly dragged past Giancarlo, he managed one final, desperate sneer, hissing under his breath with his remaining shred of defiance. "Enjoy your moment, Giancarlo. This isn't the end." Giancarlo held his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, it is," he replied quietly. They hauled Caruso away. Sophia released a breath she felt she had been holding for days, maybe for weeks. It was finished. The dark nightmare orchestrated by Luca Caruso had finally, completely ended. A gentle, reassuring weight fell onto her shoulder, Giancarlo's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, and in those two simple words, he poured a world of gratitude, relief, and emerging affection. Sophia simply covered his hand with her own, offering him a shaky but genuine smile through her tears. Around them, the remaining Dons quietly began to disperse, murmuring hushed assessments among themselves. Several offered Giancarlo profound, respectful nods as they departed, acknowledging his decisive victory and honor. A few even paused to gently pat Nico's back in passing. A silent, collective apology for ever doubting the true nature of the boy or his father. One of the oldest Donnas, the wife of Don Massimo himself, paused her exit to kindly cup Sophia's face in her frail hands. "Brava, child," the woman said, her eyes surprisingly warm. "You protected him like a true madre. The Ducas are extremely fortunate to have you." Sophia blushed deeply, humbled by the immense compliment. At last, only Giancarlo, Sophia, Nico, and their most trusted allies remained. Roberto was efficiently coordinating the collection of the forensic evidence and ensuring every remaining member of Caruso's hired personnel was accounted for and secured. The searing adrenaline of the confrontation began to ebb away, leaving only profound relief mixed with sheer, draining fatigue. Nico tugged insistently at Giancarlo's trouser leg. The Don immediately bent down, and Nico reached his arms upward. Giancarlo lifted his son high and held him fiercely close, burying his cheek against Nico's soft hair. It was a raw, tender, and utterly unguarded public embrace. Previously, Giancarlo might have been too conscious of his reputation to display such vulnerability openly, but that pride was now meaningless. He closed his eyes, savoring the absolute certainty that Nico was safe within his arms. Sophia watched father and son, her heart overflowing. She felt Giancarlo's free arm extend, gently drawing her into the circle of their hug. She willingly stepped in, wrapping one arm around them both, completing their unit. A small, spontaneous cheer erupted from Roberto and the other guards. A moment of pure, shared celebration among those who had fought and bled for this newly consolidated family. Later that same afternoon, back at the Duca estate, the vast household buzzed with a restored energy, a palpable sense of renewal. News of Caruso's spectacular disgrace had swept through their world like a cleansing fire. Allies rushed to send enormous floral arrangements and congratulatory notes. Even those who had remained tepid or outright opposed to Giancarlo's impromptu engagement were now sending rare bottles of vintage wine and, to Sophia's amused embarrassment, numerous lavish baby gifts. Clearly, many assumed a high-profile wedding, and the inevitable expectation of future heirs were immediately on the horizon. In the quiet refuge of Giancarlo's private office, he and Sophia stood side by side, looking out the massive window as Nico played freely in the meticulously kept garden under Teresa's watchful eye. The boy was utterly carefree in the late afternoon sunshine, chasing shimmering bubbles that one of the good-natured guards was blowing high into the air. Giancarlo finally turned to Sophia, his expression serious and soft. "You know you don't have to truly go through with this if you don't want to," he said quietly, carefully. Sophia faced him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Go through with what, Giancarlo?" He allowed himself a slight, complicated smile. "Marrying me. I announced our engagement publicly to give you absolute protection under the Duca name. But now that Caruso is permanently dealt with, if you would rather simply walk away from all of this, from me, from this life, I will ensure your safety regardless. There will be no consequences, no hard feelings. You'd be free." Sophia studied the strong, complex lines of his face. The man who had just risked his entire standing for his son, who had stood unwavering by her side, who had become profoundly dear to her in such a compressed time frame. Did she want to walk away? She reached out, her fingers closing gently yet decisively around his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Giancarlo," she stated softly. "Nico needs me," and her voice caught slightly, but she continued with absolute honesty. "And maybe you do too." His fingers tightened around hers instantly, powerfully. A rapid flash of relief and deep, unmistakable joy sparked in his eyes before his professional mask dropped back into place. "I do," he confessed, the admission stark. "Far more than I ever allowed myself to realize." They stood there, hand in hand, the silence between them charged with developing commitment. It wasn't the dramatic, sweeping kiss of a romance novel, nor a fairy tale declaration of eternal love, but it was solid, honest, and real. Two people irrevocably bound by their shared devotion to a remarkable child and by the brutal crucible of their recent trials. "We'll take things one day at a time," Sophia said, her practical nature asserting itself even as her heart swelled with hope. Giancarlo nodded, accepting her terms instantly. One day at a time. And if you're ready for more, you let me know. There was a subtle, yearning question embedded in his tone, a desperate hope he tried to conceal. Sophia answered not with words, but by lifting his hand to her lips and pressing a gentle, lingering kiss across his knuckles. Carlos's breath hitched, his eyes suddenly shining. A loud, excited peal of laughter drifted in from the garden. Nico was clapping rapidly at an especially large bubble that floated perfectly toward him. He pointed excitedly, calling out, "Ah!" for them to see. Sophia smiled softly. "We should join him." Giancarlo readily agreed, and together they turned toward the door leading out to the terrace. They took only a few steps before Roberto appeared, striding quickly down the hall, his phone tightly gripped in his hand. An immediate, alarmed tension etched onto his face. "Don Giancarlo," he said urgently, his voice dropping to a low register. "We have a serious situation." Sophia and Giancarlo exchanged a swift, shared glance of weary dread. What now? Roberto lowered his voice further, leaning in conspiratorially. "Our surveillance team just intercepted an encrypted message circulating on the deepest dark channels. It originates from an organization we've previously only heard whispered about, a faction considered almost mythical." He turned the phone screen toward Giancarlo. Displayed starkly on the screen was a symbol, a meticulously rendered silver crucifix overlaid onto a severe, black crown. Giancarlo inhaled sharply, a sound of profound shock. Sophia didn't recognize the insignia, but the visceral reaction of both men sent a chilling premonition down her spine. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice tight. Roberto's tone was profoundly grave. "They call themselves the Order of the Cross and Crown, an ancient, terrifyingly secretive faction, one that even the Commission has historically feared, or at least treated with extreme reverence. We thought they were mostly folklore." Giancarlo read the short message displayed beneath the ominous symbol. His face went instantly ashen. He handed the phone to Sophia so she could read the chilling directive. It was short, brutally efficient, and terrifying in its simplicity. Return the boy tonight. Sophia felt a sudden, sickening sensation, as if the floor had dissolved beneath her feet. "Return the boy, Nico?" Her voice was barely a trembling whisper. Giancarlos's jaw clenched, his eyes burning with renewed fury. They must believe Nico belongs with them, for some forgotten reason. There were always vague rumors about his maternal lineage, but I dismissed them as gossip. His eyes flashed, a terrifying mix of protective fear and raw aggression. "They will not touch my son." Just then, a familiar, high-pitched static suddenly crackled from the baby monitor device perched innocently on Giancarlo's desk. The same device that picked up signals from Nico's AC tablet when it was nearby. Sophia's head whipped around in alarm. Nico's tablet, left charging on the window seat, had suddenly illuminated. One single word pulsed rapidly on the screen in bright, ominous red letters. Kurt. At that precise moment, a thin, invasive, electronic whine drifted through the open French doors leading from the garden. Not again, Sophia thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. She and Giancarlo bolted onto the terrace. Down on the manicured lawn, Nico had ceased chasing bubbles. He stood absolutely rigid, his hands clamped tightly over his ears, his small face contorted in palpable agony. Teresa, utterly confused, was kneeling frantically beside him, attempting to soothe him, unable to grasp what was wrong. The guard with the bubble wand looked around in panic, hearing absolutely nothing himself. But Sophia and Giancarlo heard it. That awful, piercing, vibrational hum, coming from somewhere agonizingly close, somewhere inside the secluded estate grounds. A wave of ice-cold dread gripped Sophia's spine. Caruso was gone, defeated, which could only mean one terrible truth. As Giancarlo sprinted full out toward his son, Sophia remained momentarily frozen on the terrace, realization crashing over her like a freezing wave. She stared back into the deep, shadowed halls of the mansion, her eyes wide with dawning horror. This was not over. Caruso had been merely the first clumsy knife thrown at their family. The true enemy, The ancient, silent power was only now beginning to reveal its terrifying face. The relentless hum bored savagely into the soft evening air, relentless and haunting. Sophia steeled herself, adrenaline surging anew through her veins. She dashed off the terrace, racing toward Nico and Giancarlo, screaming for Roberto and the remaining security guards. Above, the first distant stars of night gleamed innocently, completely unaware of the fresh, far darker nightmare descending upon the Duca family. And as the last sliver of the sun's light finally died over the horizon, Sophia knew it deep in her bones. A new battle, one far more sinister and entrenched, had just begun.